was JP Morgan's Chase Institute that did some research, and they found that most small businesses have only got about 27 cash buffer days.
Many businesses don't really fail necessarily because their model is weak, because they've run out of time.
Some of them don't even pay themselves a salary, and some of them don't even have a separate personal account. Go for a coffee or whatever, and out comes the business card.
So why do you think that businesses discover too late that profitability and liquidity are not exactly the same thing?
Retirement is basically financial freedom. You get to a point in life where there's enough money from whatever investments where it can fund your lifestyle, ideally, definitely.
Muhami Matters with Chris Adams, powered by CJA Consulting.
Hello, welcome to Muhami Matters, where credibility meets clarity in legal and professional services. I'm your host, Chris Adams, founder of Muhami and CJA Consulting. Today's episode is about a topic that affects every founder, business owner, and decision maker in the UAE and across the Middle East: financial resilience in times of uncertainty. In recent weeks, regional developments have created short-term volatility in markets. Energy prices have fluctuated and supply chains have been disrupted. While the UAE's diversified economy, strong banking sector, and proactive measures continue to provide stability, this environment makes it even more important to examine how businesses and individuals can build real resilience. Today, my guest is Norman Lowe, investment manager at Seven Capital, where he works with clients on tailored investment and financial planning solutions. Norman's an old friend of mine, and he brings experience across real estate, capital markets, and investment distribution, and a real practical perspective on how individuals and businesses can protect themselves against uncertainty before it becomes real disruption. In this conversation today, we're going to look at why cash flow buys time, how personal resilience and business resilience are often more connected than people realize, and why doing nothing can sometimes be the most expensive strategy of all. So whether you're leading a company, building a practice, or managing your own financial future, this episode should give you a sharper lens on the risks that matter and the actions worth taking now. So after that long introduction there, Norman, I'd like to welcome you to Muhami Matters and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Chris. I really appreciate it. It's good to see you as always, and I'm looking forward to hopefully providing some value and some tips for some of your listeners.
I've got no doubt that you will. Before we really get into the topics at hand, could you just briefly introduce yourself and your role at Seven Capital, and I guess the kind of challenges you work with your clients?
So I've been in financial services for almost 2 decades now. I keep trying to avoid saying that because I just feel older and older, but that's the way life is. I actually started out in insurance, which is quite timely for this conversation because obviously that's a key part of resilience. But with SVN Capital 7, we're a broad spectrum advisory firm. So we do a lot of traditional, very well-regulated advisory work with clients, not just here, but across the world. And that can be things just as simply as pensions and savings and tweaking things, making sure fees are reduced, and you're actually working with properly independent institutions. But we also do a lot of the what I call the fun stuff, the alternatives which complement that. We do a lot of property. We do a lot of alternative asset classes like wines, whiskey casks, and even private equity and art as well.
Brilliant. And what got you into, I guess, working in the financial sector originally?
Oh, that was a very long time ago, and it was back in the days when they used to put jobs in advertised in newspapers. So I was working in property management. I came over here to the UAE. I was a young man. I was, like a lot of young men, not quite sure what I was doing, and so just taking any old job and working. And I literally saw a job in the back of a newspaper, an advertisement for insurance. So I thought, well, that's an interesting industry. And the job must have been very well read. Perhaps their marketing was good. So I went along to the interview, and that's how I started. And eventually I got into independent advisory, got myself qualified, and now I do sort of full spectrum advisory services.
Brilliant. I honestly tell the people that I know, you're one of the very, very few, I guess, fully independent financial advisors out there. Well, that's how I feel. I feel like I could really trust you a lot. I think due to your experience, but also your approach to to giving advice where you do offer quite a lot of options. So I've definitely enjoyed working with you on my own personal finances in the past. So I do highly recommend what you do. But you've obviously, as I said, you've got a lot of experience. You've been in the region for quite a while. The current regional backdrop is quite different. And when you and I were talking the other day, financial resilience came up because I think a lot of businesses at the moment are just wondering what to do. So in your opinion, I guess, what does financial resilience mean in practical terms for founders and business owners in the UAE?
I think resilience is simply explained as making sure you're ready and prepared for whatever may come. One of the problems people have is that they often try to predict events, specific events. Most of the media and is all about that. It's about, what happens if this happens? And right now with the crisis here, people are talking about, well, if this happens and if the straits are closed for this long, this is going to happen. And that's all well and good, but that's more sort of strategic, kind of detailed stuff. Resilience is about just assuming that things will happen. You won't always know what shape they will be in, but they are going to happen. And you're just going to take sensible steps to make sure that you are as best prepared as you can be, without dragging yourself into this prediction sort of model of, this is, we're going to have, the rates are going to go this high, or the dollar's going down or it's going up, or things like that. It's all about just making sure that can I meet all my obligations as an individual and as a business for 3 months or 6 months in any market condition, for example. That would be resilience.
Something you've always spoken to me about, and I'm sure a lot of of the people you work with, is about diversification. What are you seeing at the moment as far as how uncertainty is affecting business confidence right now, and likewise investment decisions and day-to-day financial planning?
I think right now we're seeing a lot of people who are more focused on one particular market or one particular asset class. They're probably more concerned than those who are well diversified. I think from a business perspective, of course, if your business is one market only, maybe you've got a coffee shop in the mall or a restaurant or something, then of course you've got certain stress points that are very different to a consultant who can take on clients from anywhere in the world. In fact, you can just park yourself somewhere and carry on as normal. So there can be quite a bit of difference. But the investors, definitely the ones who are sort of single asset, single market, I think some of them are now realizing that it's probably wise to start spreading themselves out a bit and ultimately putting eggs in different baskets, the old saying.
Okay, so are you seeing on the ground at the moment what people are doing? Are they worried, do you think? Are they putting things on pause or continuing cautiously, or is it really industry dependent?
Certain industries definitely are more concerned than others because they're more impacted. I think energy, oil and gas, probably hospitality right now as well. Obviously tourism in this region will be down for a while until things are calm again. And so for the short term, they obviously have bigger stress problems than say an industry, as I said, that's more perennial and more open to working everywhere. Or high demand industries now, because crisis often creates demand as well in certain areas. I imagine logistics from the flight perspective is probably a lot more busy now. They're bringing in more things by plane than by ship, for example. So that it's always kind of swings and roundabouts, as they say. So yeah, I think there's definitely with whoever I speak to, there's a different response. That's what I'm seeing. One thing I think there is a theme across industries, across people, individuals, businesses, is some people are now they're saying we'll wait and see, we'll just see what happens, we'll pause, and that's more a reaction than a clear strategy. I don't know many people have said to me, for example, well, part of our crisis planning or resilience planning is that when this happens, we will pause this particular activity or do that. Instead, it's more, it's happened, what should we do? Well, we'll just wait. And often not even thinking, well, what happens when this stops happening? What will you do then? And how long is it going to go on for? So that's more a reactive measure than a proactive measure. And that can be, of course, quite dangerous because we never know how long the crisis will go on for.
So I guess the clients that have worked with you will be relatively well prepared, providing they've listened to your advice. But do you feel that people and businesses are a little underprepared at the moment? From what
Some
you're
are,
seeing?
definitely. Yeah, some are. I mean, particularly the SMEs, of course, will find it harder because the key right now is making sure there's enough cash flow to cover expenses and obligations to keep the business running. And SMEs will always find it harder in most markets to get additional cash flow, go to a bank or something. If you're Apple or Microsoft, you've got lenders knocking on your door day and night to give you money. So you probably don't care as much. And ironically, they've got huge cash reserves as well anyway. So, so a lot of businesses are underprepared. I think obviously a startup that's probably just barely funded is going to struggle a lot more now in a new business. But businesses that have been around 4, 5, 6 years or so that still don't have some provisions in place are now feeling the pinch for sure.
So why do you think that businesses discover too late that profitability and liquidity are not exactly the same thing?
Oh, that's a good question. There's probably an answer for that for every business owner because they're all different. My experience has been that sometimes they see preparing for events as an expense, and a lot of businesses don't want expenses, so they just get the bare minimum of what they need or none at all if they're not obliged to. We used to see that a lot here before they introduced mandatory health cover, for example, and then suddenly businesses were finding that staff were sick, taking time off, and in some cases businesses would have to step in and try and help their staff. And so now that area of the business is covered. And I think as well, a lot of business owners, particularly smaller businesses, are just very busy. You've got a lot on their plates, and it's not a priority until it happens. It's an unfortunate thing. It's human psychology, and it's not just business owners. I'm certainly not picking on them. A lot of people are just busy with life, doing other things. And if you're not feeling the pain at that point, or you can't see it just around the corner, you're less inclined, I think, to start thinking, well, if I plan for this now for an event that may happen or may not happen, it starts to become sort of less of a priority for a lot of people. So they just don't look into it. I also think there's also an element of not knowing what options are available. And that's a big part, not knowing where to look, where to get advice, how to do it. If it's a case of building cash reserves, how do you do that? If it's a case of insurance, well, what's the right insurance that I need for my business? The business owners are busy people, and they're razor sharp focused on their business as well as their lives as well. They don't always have time to go and research the market to see which particular insurance policy is going to cover them best for their particular market segment.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our listeners and viewers are small business owners, or might be partners in accountancy firms or law firms, and effectively running their own business, and they're affected by volatility, I guess, and with geopolitical volatility or the market volatility or whatever. You never want your business to fall over. But when we spoke the other day, you made the point that many businesses don't really fail necessarily because their model is weak, but because they've run out of time. Can you just explain that a bit more?
I think there was a good example. It was JP Morgan's Chase Institute that did some research, and they found that, I think this was US data, that most small businesses there, so SMEs, have only got about 27 cash buffer days. Now, when a crisis hits, they could have a very good business model. They could be brilliant at what they do. But if a crisis hits, which means, your suppliers, your vendors, your clients aren't paying on time, and you're going to need more time, that 27 days runs out, the clock's over. That's it. You've suddenly got nothing. You can't do anything. You might be able to borrow, beg, steal, but, get the begging bowl out, run around. But most of the time, it means looking at closing the doors. I think there was, the same study said there was something like 25% only had about 2 weeks worth of cash buffer. And we know in business, especially if you've got clients that pay, sometimes there are delays, their industry is hit by what's going on right now. Or they just have a problem, something goes on, it starts a cascade effect, and that will go through the whole chain until it reaches somebody who's got that buffer. And if you can say, COVID was another good example. A lot of places were closed for weeks and months. And yet some people bounced back from that quite readily. It was quite surprising to see, especially F&B, we couldn't go out and for a long time. And then when we could, it was all masked up and limited numbers. And we saw a lot of businesses fail because of that, because they just didn't have the cash flow to keep paying the rent, keep paying the bills. I know some landlords were more flexible and everyone was trying their best, but everyone else has got their bills to pay as well. So cash flow becomes king in these situations.
Yeah. So is it pressure points around cash flow you're mainly seeing, or delayed payments and rising input costs?
Those are the main points. It's either it's going to be that there's going to be an increased cost somewhere, and there's going to be pressure because you don't have the cash flow coming in to meet those costs. I mean, some businesses haven't had significant increases in costs. Some of them have been able to actually cost cut, which isn't a necessary strategy, but sometimes it's a reaction to what's going on. But they're still finding they can't pay the bills. Can't pay the staff salaries, can't pay the insurance, the rent, whatever it may be. And that's all due to simply just not having enough in the pot to sustain themselves.
Yeah, certainly from what I'm seeing in my own perspective, I'm trying to encourage people to continue investing in their business, but in a focused way. So, let's get together, take stock of where you've come from or where you are at the moment, and then work out where you need to put your marketing budget into, where you need to focus with your sales so that you're getting the maximum return on investment. Because for me, the only way to stop that cash flow challenge is to actually spend a little bit of cash, but in the right spaces. So I'm hoping that the UAE government's invested in some stimulus packages, which are fantastic. But I think those will probably take a little while to filter down to the small business owners. Okay, if we were able to step back, say 6 weeks or so, what do you think a sensible business, a sensible resilience buffer looks like for a founder-led business?
A good one. I think every business is a bit different because some businesses have regular cash flow and they rely on that, and others have intermittent, big hits coming in, and some have a bit of both. So you've got to plan for that. I mean, if I was advising an individual client or a family, I would say that you would want between 3 and 6 months of basic obligations met. And that should probably be in a separate account, maybe even in a separate country, because it's quite easy to open stuff up in different jurisdictions now, which also gives you another buffer, because if there's something wrong in your jurisdiction, while they're fixing that problem, you're not waiting to get access to your account. We've seen that in the past. That won't happen here, but in some parts of the world, they stop people taking money out their accounts and things like that. And that's easily mitigated by having a second account elsewhere.
Yeah, I think it brings us, we'll move on to the individual shortly, but I think you're right on that point of view. And for a lot of us in the smaller size businesses, it's very difficult to separate personal and business expenses because it tends to be, bootstrapped or, comes from similar sources basically. And obviously the business needs to fund the personal life as well. Yeah. So just to counter that and prevent that, how should businesses think about stress testing cash flow forecasts rather than just relying on best case assumptions?
Well, I mean, you should never start a business with best case assumptions. It's nice to have them. They look great, but you should always be underestimating what's going to come in and overestimating the expenses by a margin. So that gives you a bit of breathing room immediately. And that should probably happen when you start your business plan before you've even opened the doors or applied for a license and things like that. And then you go deeper into that stress test. You say, well, what if our vendors don't pay? What if it takes 6 months to get the business up and running? How do we pay the bills and things like that? And a lot of businesses do that because they plan for a couple of years, sometimes even more, where there's no profit. Some of the biggest, most famous businesses that we probably use every day, Amazons and Teslas and Microsofts, some of those didn't make profits for years. And the reason they were able to do that was because they had cash flow planning. They either got investors or some other method of doing that. Small business can take the same approach with that. And it's important to review that regularly as well. If you're doing a business plan, you haven't even started, once you get running, the landscape tends to change. You find that the actual practice is different. So you should probably put into your sort of business calendar a sort of 6 monthly review of that. Just take an hour and say, okay, what's actually coming in and going out? But what does that look like? And let's put some numbers on that. And then we should start putting something away. I think for a small business, when you're starting, it's important to have a salary. Give yourself a salary that covers at least your basic expenses. So that will reduce the temptation to dip into the business for other things or random. It becomes a fixed cost. You know what it is. You try to live off of that. At the end of the year, if you've got lots of bonuses and all the rest of it, you can pay yourself a nice little bonus. But unfortunately, a lot of business owners, like you said, they blur the two quite a lot. And that can cause problems, because then you start saying, well, I get this out of the business every month, but I can get a bit more if I need it. I can do that, which of course can affect the business and the business cash flow. So a clean divider can make that a lot easier.
So say you're in a business right now in the Middle East, and I think, as you said before, finding that rather than things stopping altogether, they're kind of on pause a little bit with the view that things are going to continue. So that obviously is going to affect cash flow, but presuming there's a little bit of money in the bank, what practical steps do you think our listeners could take now around the reserves, the receivables, supply terms, working capital discipline right at this time, before things kind of go off pause and back onto play again?
I think there's two elements to this. What you can do now with, if you've got reserves, and then how to maximize the time when there's nothing coming in, to strategize to be ready to jump back in and get things back up and running. So I think with the reserves, I mean, ideally you should be looking at those before you need to dip into them. So you should be thinking about money that you can get within 48 hours, a week, whatever it is, and that might be in deposit in a bank account, things like that. And then you might have another, which might be more investment led, could be in bonds or something very safe and secure, that you may need a month or so to get that money out. So you've got a staggered layer of things. So I've got my instant cash, I've got some money that will take a bit longer, but the instant cash will cover me for that. And then by then we should be out of the crisis. So it's segregating even your emergency funds is a good idea as well, rather than shutting it all in your 5% deposit account or 4%, whatever it is, because that's great, but you might not need all of that at once. You might need that for 2 months, and then you could be making more somewhere else. But it's important to make sure that you've planned for liquidity, because obviously if you start investing capital and put it on deposit, that can result in, it takes time to get out, and that could create another problem. So you got to make sure that you're still fairly liquid.
So I think, as we sort of alluded to before, what you've just spoken about then also applies to personal finances as well. Why are personal resilience and business resilience so tightly linked, especially in SMEs, do you think?
I think it's kind of the same thing, because it's the same problem ultimately. Even if you were working for a company, you're just an employed professional, your stress point is, well, what if I lose my job or the company can't pay me? In a business, your stress point is, what if my customers or clients can't pay me, or because business goes down? Exactly the same problem, really. And you may solve them in slightly different ways, but it ultimately comes down to, I'm going to need money to pay bills and live and pay for the mortgage and the rent and whatever else it is, kids' school fees, while this problem is happening. And it's quite simple in that respect. If you look at it top down, there's not a lot of difference. And so if you blend the two together in a small business, like a lot of them do, you've still got the same problem. Which is, in fact, you double, because if you're paying yourself salary and you can't pay the salary, you've got the same issue as well. So by fixing the business one separately, you can still pay your salary as well. But you should also try to have your own reserves as well as backup.
How do you find then that is the case quite often in the UAE and the wider GCC, that the owners have too much of their personal financial life tied up in their business and vice versa? Yeah.
There's a lot of that. I don't know many people. I think of clients and friends who've got businesses. I don't many of them some of them don't even pay themselves a salary, first of all, and some of them don't even have a separate personal account. You go out with them and you're buying something, going for a coffee or whatever, and out comes the business card. And it's like for personal expenses and things. I don't know, sometimes people write off expenses for tax and things like that. But, you sort of have to say, you should have your own as well. Something happens to the business. And business stress test might not be market related. It could be, sometimes it could be a misunderstanding puts you into a spot of trouble legally, and suddenly you find that accounts are being limited, or you've got other issues going on. And that's another reason to have a separate account. And this is why we do LLCs and things like that too, so that if the business is in deep trouble, it shouldn't be affecting your personal life too much. But that's another form of resilience, actually.
Yeah. So what are the biggest risks then, I guess, when things like personal health, you alluded to then, to something going wrong from another perspective, but personal health for me is a risk, especially if you're in a business with another business partner, for example, and you both maybe run the business together, and if one gets sick, all of a sudden, and the other's left to run the company, that's obviously quite a big risk. So what do you think are the biggest risks from that perspective?
If you've got a situation with partnerships, or maybe the business is a loan consultancy, perhaps you've just got a few sort of remote staff that you work with occasionally, and somebody can't work who's a key to that business, then that could have a serious effect. If I try and think of an example, even if you think of like a good restaurant in a hotel or somewhere in a high-end restaurant, they may have a star chef. That chef is the big draw. They're the top of their game. They're the sort of Gordon Ramsay or whatever the name's there. What if they can't work for 6 months? They have a car accident or heart attack or something. That will have a material effect on the business, for sure. And so that's where insurance comes in for things like that. Most of us think of insurance as paying the doctor's bills, paying the fees, things like that. And the government here was really proactive in making sure that became a mandatory thing, because that's a huge across the board, and it means that people have a bit more peace of mind. But if you're sick for a prolonged period, then of course you need to start thinking about income, because you won't be able to earn forever if you're recuperating for 2 years. You may not want to. You may want to go away and go to a retreat and get yourself back in order and everything. And in that time, there's still costs, both to yourself and to the business. And I think there was one story of business partners, and I obviously won't say names. Let's call them Bob and Steve for argument's sake. And they built up a pretty good business. And there was a conversation where they were talking about what happens if one of them's out of the picture, one of them passes away, because we're not getting any younger. And they said, well, that's okay. Bob said, that's okay, because my wife could take over, or my brother, who runs a business separately, but they're great acumen. My wife's a professional, a senior lawyer, no issues at all. Whereas Bob was thinking about his wife, who's very nice, but not a business-minded person at all, and is known for spending a lot of money and enjoying herself. And they're sort of looking and say, well, if the business comes to it, it's going to be a problem. I'm going to take all the shares, and she'll probably want a say in it, and she'll want money and everything. And so then you start thinking, well, wouldn't it be just easier if that did happen, that you could just buy all the shares for her, that it's done? And so they'll be comfortable. They're looked after. They get the fruits of the work that the partner's done, but they don't have to be involved in the business. We call that key man insurance, and also partnership protection. And you can even go deeper into that. You can make it more complicated. You can look at insurance where there's an investment element inside the insurance, and that grows slowly over time as well. It can be owned by the business, so it's a business asset, but it's off the books, so you don't have to report that you've got money growing somewhere. And that can be borrowed against as well. So that could be another form of resilience. So you can say, okay, the next 6 months cash flow is looking a bit tight. We're going to borrow from our own insurance policy. The rates for that are going to be better. The insurance company is going to be a lot more flexible because we're insured. So if anything happens to us, the insurance company gets the money back. So it's a very low risk loan for them. Plus you've built up the pot anyway. So there's all sorts of things you can do, just going into that particular area of ensuring both the star players of the business who bring in the revenue and the clients and look after everything, and also the partners, who actually own the business. Where do their shares go? What happens if the worst happens?
So what else do you recommend then from an individual basis for forgetting kind of about the company, but thinking about those who are important in the company, like you just mentioned? What sort of, financial planning should they do? What kind of good practices should they be taking on to protect themselves and their families?
For the individuals in a business, this applies to anyone really. Once you start earning past a certain level where you've met all your basic needs, I suppose you could call that middle class, whatever you want to call it, depending on which market we're in. You can start buying insurance for yourself. You can open up a second bank account in another jurisdiction. You can even add to your own, if you've got medical insurance, some companies will allow you to pay a bit more and get enhanced cover. Things like that. Make sure, of course, you've got your wills in place. If you've got a family, letters of wishes, especially for us expats over here, there's a lot, the prime population here is from overseas, and a lot of us have got children. If something happened to both spouses, who's going to look after the children until the guardians come? Things like that. You can start sort of looking at these things, and all you're essentially doing is you're taking care of future problems way ahead of time. And in some cases, you'll save a lot of money, particularly with insurance. It's what every insurance salesperson in the world says, but it's true. It's cheaper to do when you're younger. It's much cheaper to do. I mean, life insurance premiums are calculated. Some companies do it on a by-quarter basis. So if applying now and applying in 3 months, there's a difference in the premium that's going up. And of course, once you get past sort of 30, 35, your risks for heart disease, cancer, all these things go through the roof. And a lot of people don't like to talk about that, but the insurance companies have all the data, their actuaries go through this. And so they charge accordingly. So, for a lot of people, they start earning enough money to cover the basics, late 20s, early 30s, a lot of them. And then they postpone these things for years. They don't do them. And then suddenly, there's a wake-up call, there's a crisis event, somebody they know something happens to, and then they go and do it. And of course, by then it's 10, 15% more expensive than it would have been if they'd done it years ago. So it's a cost-saving exercise as well as a resilience-building exercise sometimes.
So you just talked a little bit about life insurance, succession planning, and you talked about the situation where people have covered their basic expenses and then potentially have some surplus. And it's very tempting to, walk down to the mall and buy a nice big TV or a nice handbag or whatever it may be. What would be the other options or the more sensible options in inverted commas that people could do to ensure that, when these challenges occur, geopolitical or financial, whatever it may be, that you are protected?
It's quite funny you mentioned handbags and going to the mall, because I have a meeting later with a client, and we started off where he said to me he's actually selling his business. He's still working in the business, but he's got a big windfall that came through. And he said to me, Norman, I want to make sure that I don't go and buy a Rolex. Please stop me from doing this. So it was kind of
that's supposed to be an investment, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of them can be, absolutely. But, he wanted to make sure that his bases were covered and he'd had things spread out nicely and everything. I mean, it comes to, this is can be a bit of a discipline issue. But I also think sometimes people think that these things are more expensive than they are. Often we can calculate down to, the nearest cent what you would need to have 3 months or a year of expenses and insurance and all that. Or you can just simply say, well, look, I've got a few $100s spare each month that I won't miss. I'm going to go and spend that on the brunch, or it's going to go towards, things I don't need. So we'll start with that. We'll just do covers and basics, and that might give me a few months of cover, and then we'll review that in a year's time, see how it's going, or 6 months' time. It doesn't have to be like you've got to spend 6 hours going through spreadsheets and charts and making your life difficult. Nor do you have to stop living your life. You've got to live your life. And sometimes you need a few treats, particularly if you've been working hard. Obviously, if you've got problems with spending, which is a problem in and of itself, you might need some coaching or help with that. That's probably a separate thing, because some of us do have that. The money comes in and it's gone immediately. And then you have to start asking yourself, okay, maybe I need some help with therapy or something like that. But for most of us, we can put aside small amounts that would be, the same as going out for a nice dinner once a month. So if you go out every week for a nice dinner, maybe just have one dinner that isn't so nice. Just go to the food court or something, or go somewhere else. Go to the beach and have a picnic instead. It doesn't have to be this kind of big burden upon you. But I think as well, if you've got dependents, then you do have responsibilities. You should really be making a few sacrifices, perhaps, that you wouldn't do if you didn't have that pressure as well. So, yeah, it's sometimes it's important to have a good, honest look at yourself and your lifestyle, and say, okay, there's definitely room here for doing a few things. But I'm always open to having a chat with people. There's certainly no sort of sales conversations, just to say, well, okay, yeah, actually you do have enough to get a life insurance policy for yourself, or you can actually open an offshore bank account. You can do these things. You don't need me to do that. Certainly you don't have to, but you can do that. You've got enough there. And I think often people just don't know they have enough. A lot of people come to me and I meet people. Even last night I was out for networking, and some people assume that I only deal with sort of Warren Buffetts and Bill Gates and people like that, and that I don't get out of bed for less than $10,000. And so it'd be nice if that was the way I structured my business, but it's not. And I'm quite happy to give people advice with absolutely no commercial interest at all on my side, because the more people that have got the basics covered, the better it is for society as a whole. There's less stress all around, there's less debt. It means the financial system becomes more robust. So it's, we all can contribute in some small way by doing that. It's not just simply because we've got a personal stake or a business stake in it.
Yeah, certainly I can vouch for you being very genuine and honest without any potential payback or anything like that, which is not true about all people that I've, IFAs that I've worked with, for example. So I do hold you in very high regard from that perspective. But something we alluded to earlier, I think, is, or something I've always heard you tell people is about diversifying. So that whether that's diversifying into different asset classes or to different jurisdictions, or just basically not having everything in the one place, so that if there is some volatility or some opportunity, that you can make the most of it.
I think the way I look at it, particularly in a market like here, very strong market, a tremendous growth. Obviously, short term now there's some shaky, but medium and long term it's amazing, and it can be so good that you forget that there's a whole world out there. And especially as individuals or as a small business, you start focusing on, you can see the pile of gold there on the hill and you just go for it. And you forget there are lots of piles of gold all over the world. There's different markets doing different things at different times. Yes, some of them are not as dynamic or as interesting, but if you're able to, why wouldn't you have a bit of everything? And if you talk to people at family offices or the sovereign wealth funds, see what they do, just broadly see what they're doing. Even the sovereign wealth funds here, they own properties in 20 different countries. They've got businesses they're brought into. They're investing all over the place. And then you've got a single person, it might be me, someone saying, no, I only buy real estate in my home country. That's all I do. They said, but why? It's I don't know those markets, and that's a fair. If you don't know the markets, you don't know them. That's fair. But you can learn about them. You can find someone that knows about them. Or I don't buy stocks because they're always going up and down. Or I don't buy gold, or I do buy gold. I've met people that only buy gold, for example, and that's sort of a little bit worrying because gold never generates a revenue or income. You could probably borrow against it, I imagine. And so it's important to have that. And also when you're planning, you've got to think about what's going to give me income and what's just going to give me growth for later income, because those are two very separate things. And diversifying, again, prevents problems with that. And jurisdiction, of course, is very important because we see every region has its problems from time to time. I think right now, if you've got property in, say, Europe or other parts of the world, you're probably a bit less concerned about income from those properties than you might be from, say, here right now. However, when things turn around again, who knows, maybe in 6 months, revenue here is up and there it's down. So that's why we diversify.
Yeah, I certainly think there's opportunities out there. I think that's something to bear in mind because, when one thing goes down, something else generally goes up, doesn't it? So I think that's probably where we should say overall, you always have to go to someone with financial expertise. Nothing in this episode or in general is financial advice. It depends very much on people's individual circumstances. And that's certainly what I've seen from working with you, for example, that it is very tailored to the individual and their goals. Something that that occurs to me as a business owner and as an expat is things like superannuation and pensions, because we sometimes forget when we live in places like the UAE and Singapore and Hong Kong, perhaps, that you're not actually, collecting a pension or a super fund or anything like that automatically, like you may do in your home country. So what do you, what do you tell people to look at from that perspective to make sure you've got enough money for retirement, for example?
Retirement is basically financial freedom. You get to a point in life where there's enough money from whatever it may be, whatever investments, where it can fund your lifestyle. Ideally, indefinitely. You're right. I mean, many countries, the UK does the same thing. We've got sort of national insurance, Australia's got superannuations. Some companies provide private pensions, things like that. And some do here as well. But ultimately, it's the same principle. You're building up a pot on the side, whether you're doing it yourself and you're buying properties and businesses and things like that and spreading yourself out, or you're just doing a more traditional route of buying into funds and stocks and just letting that build over time. Because if you leave that long enough, that would generally be quite good, with the idea that one day you'll start drawing down from there. When you're over here, one of the things that most people notice immediately is, of course, tax-free salaries. And so that can be, yes, I've got more money in my pocket, but then that creates a kind of a fork of decisions where you go, well, I've got tax-free salary, so I can increase my lifestyle, I can enjoy it more, can have fun. or I can use that to build my own future, or some of it. Maybe if you've got a savings of 30% because of tax or something, say 15% is for my future, 15% is for lifestyle. Then you're on the right track. And then you just need to work out the numbers for that and what it's going to be. But yeah, a lot of people don't do that because it's, we're short-term thinkers as human beings, and it goes back to resilience as well. We're not thinking about every eventuality. We're worried about now, and we're very busy, and we've got immediate pressures, so we deal with those. But most successful humans throughout history have allocated some of their time and resources to thinking about the future, thinking about a day that may never come, but they still plan for that. It's probably why humans started farming, because somebody probably said, well, every day you've got to go up and go and hunt something, and it's quite risky and it's dangerous, and what if the animals have moved on or whatever? Whereas with farming, you've got a bit more control over that, especially if it's like livestock as well, and you can plan for that. But, a farm can take years to get up and running. It's the same thing with your pension, same with all of that. So it's not an alien decision-making process. It's something we've been doing for thousands of years, but we have to make it a lot more personal, because we tend to outsource that to the state or to our employers in other countries. Here, we've got to be a bit more kind of, I've got to take control of this myself and not wait for someone else to do it for me. So, I always say to people, whatever your tax savings is, start with a portion of that. You don't have to give up your entire lifestyle, but start with that. And then you think about what you're going to do with that. Are you going to save to invest into property? Are you going to buy funds? Are you going to do a bit of both? That's more the detail side, what you're interested in and where to start with.
Yeah, certainly the art of the wine and the other assets that you mentioned are quite interesting as a way of diversifying. It's not something that I've thought about before that often. So yeah, it's certainly a lot of opportunities out there.
There are a lot. Yeah. I mean, those are interesting ones, because they call them alternatives for a reason, because they complement what you're doing. I mean, some people, of course, are in there as those industries, and they're making wine and whiskey and producing art. That's a business, then that's something a bit different. But most people don't know that. I mean, the key factor is they're all tangible assets. They're not paper assets like stocks and shares. And there is a lot of psychological comfort knowing you've got something. Even if it's in a different country, it's sitting in a warehouse somewhere, you can get on a plane, go and visit it, you can touch it, you can look at it. So there's that. And of course, if it's real and it's tangible, you can also insure it, which can create a layer of safety as well. Of course, you want to insure it against fires, damage and theft and things like that. So they create a nice part of the portfolio, but they're not, pardon the pun, very liquid. And the whiskey and the wine, of course, are liquids. They are things that you buy and hold, because the value in those is basically in waiting. A good single malt can take decades to get to where it needs to be, but that creates supply constraints, because if you had, I don't know, let's go back to, what was it, 2009 or 2007, when Steve Jobs brought the iPhone out. And if he stood up on the stage and said, here's the iPhone, here's all the bells and whistles of it. If he then said, right, I'll see you all in 20 years, I'm going to put these in a warehouse because they won't be ready until then, iPhones would probably be a lot more expensive than they were, because it took that long for it to come in. You'd have to store them and all the rest of it. So those assets are good for that sort of thing. They're not necessarily good if you want cash flow, though, right away, which is why, again, part of resilience building is diversification. You spread out things to make sure that some of your assets are long-term, some are medium, some are short-term.
So on that note, you've said there's a real difference between planned waiting and passive avoidance. What does that difference look like in practice?
I think it looks probably more like a difference between a smile on the face and a furrowed brow. I'd say, I mean, if your business is such where you said, well, if we haven't got any business for 3 months, we do these 3 things, and one of them is we shut off the lights, we do that. Then when that happens, you're ready for that. You're psychologically prepared, and you've got a plan in place for that. So you probably do have a smile on your face because you're ready for that. Not just a cash flow preparation, but just a business preparation. Whereas if you've just decided to stop because it's uncertain, it doesn't feel good right now, because your partners, your clients, your customers are suddenly a bit worried, then you don't really have a plan in place, and you don't know how long you could continue doing that for. So it's a very different set of decisions. It's the same action, but it's been taken for very different reasons. And if you've just decided to stop because you're not sure, well, you're probably not going to be sure about when to start up again or when to throw the towel if it was an extreme event. And that creates its own set of problems. Whereas the business that said, okay, this is what we're going to do when this happens, they've got a plan for all of that. It's all worked out, not to the last detail, but they've got a broad idea that we can survive for 3 months without any income. If it goes on longer than that, well, we can do this and this, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of people now, I think probably more than half, are simply reacting and then sitting down and wondering, what do I do next? And that's where the furrowed brow comes in, and the sleepless nights.
I guess this goes for, you mentioned businesses, but it goes for individuals as well, who I think probably are all of a sudden thinking, okay, there may be my job may be in doubt, or my business may be a bit weak, and that affects way more than just the business. It's your life, your whole life. Even if you physically feel you have to move somewhere for a little while or for permanently.
Yeah, I think this one thing that's overlooked is the life toll, the psychological toll when there's a crisis. And one of the reasons, going back to insurance, that we talk about critical illness insurance and life insurance. If you have a heart attack, and I've had friends who have heart attacks, I've lost 2 friends in the last 10 years. The surviving family are going through a very bad time, and the last thing they need to be thinking about is paying bills, or where the money is, what's going on, which is why you set up those things. There's the same with the business. So you don't want to be thinking about the day-to-day minutiae and being plugged into the news and all of that and see what's going on in a crisis. You want to know that I've got a plan, I'm going to get on with it, and I've taken reasonable precautions and steps, even if that means I'm stepping out the country for a little while and doing that. And the problem is when you don't have any provision to make plans. I suppose that comes down to what money is. Ultimately, it's just options. And this is what you're really trying to do in a business or in your personal life, is to give yourself as many options as possible.
So how can we, as listeners, create these trigger points, review days, decision frameworks, instead of just reacting emotionally to the headlines?
I think whether you're a business or an individual, I think hopefully you realize cash flow is quite important. So work on building some reserves. You might not have a lot of money. Maybe there's not coming in. You have very little left at the end of the month, but something can go towards that. Make a plan for that. You might be able to, now that it's already happened, you can't change that, but you can start planning for the future so that it doesn't happen again. If you're in a better position, you're in a stronger position, you've got more reserves, more wealth generally, you can look at all kinds of different insurance as well, maybe even some investments, because a business can make investments too. And you could be simply investing into something that will provide cash for a later date that may be on or off the books. There's ways of looking at that depending on how you structured your business. And of course, don't stop networking. Don't stop talking to people. Get help. Ask questions. Go and find a shoulder to cry on if you need to as well. It's not just about money. We all work. Hopefully, we'll work so that we can live. We're not living to work. And times like this, even if you are prepared, you still might want to have a circle of friends. So I was talking to someone at the networking event last night who organises them, and he said that what they see whenever there's a crisis, and this is going back years, is for about 3 weeks everyone stops networking. Nobody goes out, nobody does anything. And then suddenly they realize actually they need it. And maybe they don't need it for business. They just need it for themselves. Because we're not islands. I could say sometimes I'm quite a loner. I like to go off and brood and things, but ultimately we need people. We need it. The COVID taught us that. A lot of people were quite isolated, and that was really tough on some people. And even people that had plenty of money, plenty of reserves, were doing fine, were suddenly sat there with no one to talk to apart from on a screen. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they couldn't really engage with someone on a human level. So that's a key part as well. It's not just the money side of things.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. This week I've had quite a number of calls with different people, and it's been so nice to reconnect after 2 or 3 weeks of just head down a little bit, and just you realize you're not alone, that there are other people who can give you good advice, or just maybe not a shoulder to cry on necessarily, but just to bounce some ideas off and say, how are you handling this? How can we help each other? And it's actually quite inspiring. And I think that's the UAE, Dubai especially, has built that business community, which really is a community that they help each other out and support each other. And you're generally not climbing on someone else's shoulders. You're climbing together.
That's a great thing about business here. Yeah, there's a wonderful thing about business here is most people are the door's open. You can go talk, you can bounce ideas. You can tell them your problems, whatever, without any sort of obligation. There's not many places in the world that are like that. I think it's probably why one of the key contributions to success is probably why a lot of people have stayed and they're just carrying on because they know it will bounce back. They know things will be fine and they're getting themselves ready for that.
So for someone listening today, what are the first 3 things they should review this month? I guess we could do that from both a business perspective and as an individual as well, as a family.
Obviously, cash reserves, making sure if you do have cash reserves, where are they? How are they held? Are they all in one place? Maybe it's time to segregate them into sort of like immediate cash and 2 weeks, 5 weeks cash, put them in a different bank account, in a different bank, in a different country. Look at your cash reserves now. Make sure, and of course, you probably, if you are sort of more of a big spender, maybe cut back a little bit of lifestyle, but don't stop everything. You carry on as normal, but you obviously might defer luxury purchases for a while unless you're at a certain wealth level. Well, that doesn't matter. Reviewing insurance. Obviously, the first one is your healthcare, because your health is everything. Make sure you've got proper healthcare in place. Speak to there's very good insurance brokers in this market. Go and speak to them if you need second opinions. Look at what you're getting from your policies, because some policies will also include things like mental health and just checkups and wellness and things like that. Those are important things to look at now. And then look at your life insurance, your critical illness insurance. If you don't have it, please consider getting somewhere. You don't have to spend a lot, but get something in place. Particularly critical illness, that will affect more of us more than the life cover. But they're both key. I think if you've got a family, you want to be thinking about reviewing your wills and your letters of wishes, what happens, family succession planning. If you have employees as well, it might be time to make sure that they know about all these options too. Because you'd be surprised how many companies, they've got lots of people working for them who might be getting into financial difficulty, and the company doesn't know about it. And that, of course, affects the employer's performance at work, and that affects your business. So, it's not just simply a case of, well, I've paid for your life, your healthcare. What else do you want? Maybe find there's lots of people that come in and talk to businesses about the basics of financial planning and, having an offshore account or having a backup plan. Who to speak to if you get into debt and you can't get out. That's quite a common thing as well. Go through all those basics, all those steps. Go speak to people. Make sure you're not doing it all alone. I think with business owners particularly, founders are doing everything themselves and the business is their baby. And they often take on a lot of things that they probably don't need to. They can delegate a lot. Finding out how to do that, because a lot of the things I talk about, you can delegate all of these. You can find someone to help you with your banking, your insurance, your investments, all of that, and that will free up your time to do other things. You can focus on what you love and enjoy. I can't remember who it was that said to one of the networking groups here. They said that everyone who runs a business is doing 2 things every day. You're doing something that creates revenue, and you're doing things that don't create revenue. So if you would want to go and research the market so that you're up to speed as much as a mortgage broker or an insurance broker on what insurance to get, that's going to take days and weeks and weeks. That's not going to earn you any money, just to save yourself a few pennies down the line, which an insurance broker could do for you anyway, and it costs you the same. So you don't have to outsource all these things if you don't want to. No, you don't have to.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, actually. Not everybody realizes that you don't have to pay an insurance broker. You don't have to pay a financial advisor necessarily, because they paid by,
there's a margin in most of these services anyway. Yeah, I mean, they call it a marketing budget, a commission, whatever. Obviously, you want to make sure you're dealing with someone reputable. If you're looking at regulated products, you want to make sure that they're regulated, qualified, all that sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, for some things, it's easy just to outsource. I mean, I would say, like, I could fix my own car. I can do my decorating. I can do the DIY of the house. I can do so many things myself. And in theory, that would save me potentially a bit of money as well in some cases. But most people don't do that unless it's your hobby or something, because that could take hours, and I probably would be half as good as somebody who does it 3 times a day. So why would I do that? Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you've been burned badly and you might have had bad advice and things, you're going to think differently about that. But there are certain core services, especially with insurance, where you really don't need to go researching in the market. I think the only research you need to do is making sure you're speaking to a good broker. who knows their stuff. Same with mortgages as well. Some mortgage brokers will not charge a fee, or it's very nominal. And sometimes they rebate that once you've got your mortgage in place. And if they're speaking to the banks every day and going through everything, they probably do know a bit more about it than me, who's busy on calls all day and doing other things and busy with the family in the evenings.
So actually, Norman, you alluded to something very interesting there about making sure that the financial advisor or the insurance broker, whoever is, properly registered and accredited. What do we actually need to look for? What kind of registrations and accreditations do we need to look for in a financial advisor and perhaps an insurance broker, someone who's going to look after your future for you?
Yeah. I think the first thing, to make sure they're qualified. Most industries have their own qualifications, and there'll be a baseline. I did mine through the Chartered Institute in the UK. It's recognised here, but there's other institutions doing that. So no one's going to say, no, I'm not going to tell you my qualifications. So that's fairly easy. Make sure that they're sort of registered properly, working in the right way. It can be a bit of a grey area because sometimes you might be looking at alternative assets which are not by nature regulated by a financial advisory or regulator. But the baseline stuff you should have, here you've got to have insurance authority, central bank, those sorts of things. Is the company that they work for covered by that? Because then there'll also be other protections. You've got someone to go and complain to if things went really bad. So you've got to look at that. And I think like with most things as well, you often are looking at referrals. I mean, most of us live and breathe by that. If I need to go and see a dentist, I call up my mate and say, you had your teeth done last week. Where did you go? Was he any good? And then you go and check him out. Or where's a good place to get a proper Italian pizza? I've got a friend who goes out, I'll ask him. Same sort of thing, often an introduction or referral to somebody will usually mitigate a lot of the problems. Not always. Some people are very good at continuing for a long time when they're not doing the right thing. But yeah, regulation and qualifications. Experience too. Not to dismiss people who are, just starting out and younger. But if somebody's doing it a long time, they probably will have different insights and be able to look after you a bit better as well. And of course, then you've got, when you actually meet someone, if you don't like them, if you get some red flags and things, then of course, find someone else. That's not a problem.
But that all makes perfect sense and is logical in some ways. So yeah, do a bit of due diligence, I think, is the key, and I find out what qualifications someone needs to have in order to be a proper registered advisor. Well, Norman, it's been super informative today, and you've given us a lot of practical tips. So thank you for that. If anyone does want to reach out to you, how can they get in touch?
Well, if they know you, they can obviously get my details from you. I'm happy to share my number that way. They can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm on there, Norman Lowe. We've got the company website, svncap.com. You can reach out to the company. I do have a blog as well, which is called Thoughts of the International Investor. That needs a shorter title, I think. But I'd probably say it might be easier if you don't mind to reach out to you if they can't find me on LinkedIn. I think if you do a hashtag Norman Lowe, you'll probably get me quite high up in a Google search ranking there. So you could reach out that way.
I'll definitely tag you in this episode if nothing else. But yeah, Thoughts for the International Investor is an interesting read every week that comes out. So I'll have to stay glued to my inbox for it. So it is well worth subscribing to for our audience.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it. I'm glad to know that. And if anyone wants any topics, wants me to write about anything in particular, even if they don't want to talk to me professionally, but they want you write something about this, I'm always happy to put something together because I'm always reading and researching. So if people want to read something, it's as a reference point, happy to do that.
Thank you. All right. So that's Norman Lowe from SVN Capital. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. I really appreciate it.
For our audience, that's it for today's episode of Muhami Matters. Again, a massive thanks to Norman Lowe from SVN Capital for joining us. I think today's conversation was a timely reminder that resilience is not built in the middle of a crisis. It's built in advance through stronger cash flow discipline, better alignment between personal and business planning, and the confidence to act deliberately rather than drift. So a lot of it is about planning. We live in a region where uncertainty can create real pressure, but also real opportunity. And that kind of preparation can then become a genuine competitive advantage. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with your network. I'd really appreciate that one. For more insights and support, visit muhami.ae or connect with me at CJA Consulting. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered. Thank you for joining us on Muhami Matters. If you found today's episode valuable, subscribe and connect with me to stay updated. Join me again soon as we continue to bring you credible insights, practical strategies, and trusted advice to empower your professional journey. I'm Chris Adams. Until next time, stay informed and stay empowered.